Alright, we've done a lot of work over the last few days, so your video here doesn't require you to do a lot of writing, not least in the first part. I do need you to make sure you pay attention because the questions you just looked at was your whole test, and it pretty much was your whole test in order. So I need you to make sure you follow along, at least grab your calculator, type some things in if you don't think you got it right. But here's what's happening. The quiz you just took is worth 50 points. I will give you 50 out of 50 if you got a certain amount right. I'll figure out what that is, but it'll probably be about, if you got an 80% or higher, actually even a 70% or higher, I'll probably give you a 50. Anything like a 50 to a 70, I'll probably give you a 40 out of that, and then anything else I probably won't put anything in because, again, only A's and B's really help your average. This page here that we're going through right now, you get 20 points for writing as much as you can on the sheet, and you get an extra 30 points for answering the question. So in other words, if you go all the way through, first off, when we get to the writing portion, if you write everything you're supposed to write, that you can write, you get 20 points for that, for handing it in, and again you get 30 extra points, which makes an altogether 50 here and a potential 50 here for your quiz for the day. So make sure you do what you can. Again, also I told the sub or whoever's sitting in the room that if you're not doing your job, to just go ahead and make sure they jot down your name so you don't get any points at all. But right now you should be listening to what's going on, and again following along to make sure you know it. Number one, first thing you should have done was just take it, because remember, if you want to know if it's a solution, you simply take this number and do 6 parentheses -2 close plus 2 equals, and you compare -10 to 20, and of course 20 is better, which means that A should have been circled. I hope you circled it. Now, something you don't know, and again you might want to type this in because I'm going to show you a shortcut that works whenever you want to sub in some numbers. If you take the up arrow and hit the button and highlight it, notice that if you hit up it highlights this, and then you hit enter, it's kind of like a copy and paste. Then you can arrow back to this thing, highlight the 2, type 1 over it, and see that this actually turns into a -4. Now -4 up here also would be true because first off it was -10 compared to 20, which is true. Now it's -4 compared to 20, which is true. We can go back, steal it again by hitting the up arrow, delete the negative, and put a 6 in its place, and we end up with 38, which obviously is false, so that doesn't work, and I don't think 7's going to work either, which is 44. So the only two answers you should have chosen are A and B on that. Is -0.5 a solution? Again, what you want to do here is -4 parentheses -0.5. Again, make sure you know how to plug that stuff in. Plus 3 equals, and notice that you get, I'm sorry, I guess it is supposed to be that. It's supposed to be 5. Is 5 greater than 1? Yes. And so that would be a solution. The next part, something we haven't really seen in a while, but you are going to see this on the test. Writing inequality for the graph. Remember here that you want to have something that has x is greater than or less than whatever, but because here's the idea that I get from this. The arrow looks just like the symbol, and so I know it's going to be this symbol because of the arrow, or the tip, the way the arrow is going. The thing you got to remember is that because this is closed, it should have a line under it, and the number that we're using here is -2. Same thing on this. If you put your x down and you copy the tip of the arrow and you recognize that this is a -1 and it's open at -1, it means you should have had those two answers. But again, we'll talk about that on Monday as we review a little bit and get into the stuff that we're going to be doing. The solving graph, I do hope that you graphed it, because again, the whole point to all the stuff that we did over the time of graphing is making sure you understood that everything you solve you need to graph. So again, if you didn't do that this time, hopefully it sticks a little bit, because you're probably not going to get all the points you should, but that's good because it'll have you get them when they really count. Don't forget we want to get rid of the 5, so we will subtract 5, x comes down, symbol does not change, 14 comes down, 14 is my important number, open circle going to the right. On number 5, First thing you want to do is get rid of this 2, so we divide by 2. We divide by 2. Negative 14 divided by 2 is negative 7, greater than or equal to y. Remember that you do not want to leave y over there, so you flip your y, you flip your symbol, you flip your 7, negative 7 here, close circle, going to the left. Again, hopefully you did these right, because a lot of these are just repetitive from all the stuff we've done. Number 6 is the one I said not to get confused on. This is a compound inequality. And again, as a compound inequality, you want to make sure you view this as two separate problems. But the key thing is you look at n and recognize that 2 is attached to n. So what you should do here is divide by 2. The secret here is that you must make sure you divide by 2 on all the sides, which is the middle, the left, and the right. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Keep the sign the same. N comes down. Keep the sign the same. 7 comes down. Again, the graph on this is tricky because you have two numbers. Should be a negative 2 here and a 7 there. Both of these signs are open, and because n is in the middle, you should have shaded in the middle. Again, I do hope that you're shading in a way that makes it visible, not something that's trying to be slick or lazy and then gets it marked wrong or not getting any credit. But again, the good news is you'll get your information on Monday when you get your papers back, and we go over it and we get to see exactly what happened or how you did. Number 7, I know we talked about the negative x, but the key thing about negative x is you don't worry about the negative x until it's alone. So the first thing you want to do is move this 8. This 8 is positive because there's no number in front, so what you should have done was subtract the 8 and got negative x is greater than 2. From there, your x is negative, so you should switch your x, switch the sign, switch your 2. And again, graphing this, there's only one important number. It is an open circle. It is going to the left, and that is all. Number 8, 4y minus 3 greater than or equal to 17. This is the home base problem that we've seen before. Again, the first number we were supposed to look at is the 3. This is a negative 3. So we will add 3 to both sides. After that, you'll bring down your 4y. This goes away. Copy the sign with 20. You will then divide both sides by 4, bringing down the y, bringing down the sign, bringing down 5. And again, to graph this, close circle, because there is a line under it, and going to the right. Number 9, another problem that we should know because again it's not so bad to do. First off, you got to remember that this is the distributive property. You have to also remember that whenever you do the distributive property, the outside number meets everybody on the inside. So this is what's going to happen, that you get 4x minus 12, not 4x minus 3. Again, 4x minus 12, copy the sign, 24. You will then move the 12, which is negative, by adding 12 to both sides. Bring down your 4x, bring down your sign, bring down 36. From there, again, do what you've been trained to do, which is to divide by 4, getting the answer of 9. Again, make it a habit. Start making it a habit that everything you solve, you are going to graph, because on this test, from what I know, everything you solve, you are going to graph. Yep, looking at it right now is... Yeah, because I see everything here. It says solve and graph, solve and graph. Yeah, every equation you solve on this test is going to be solve and graph. So everything you solve for the rest of this chapter, just make sure you graph it, make it a habit. F less than or equal to 3f or negative 3f plus 12. Again, in this situation, make sure you understand that there's a f and a 3f, the variables on both sides, but this is not the smallest because remember that the negative value is the smallest. And so we are going to add 3f to both sides. F and 3f make 4f. Keep the sign. That goes away with the 12. From there, you divide by 4. Divide by 4. F is less than or equal to 3. Again, one number is important. Close that symbol. Should be going to the left. And that is all. Number 11, the first thing I wanted you to notice, or first thing I want you to learn to notice, is that this fraction is going to be gone, but its fraction is negative, so the best thing you should do is to flip it around first. That was the skill that we tried to learn, well, kind of talk about yesterday and on the video the day before. From there, now that your fraction is positive, you'll multiply both sides by 2, bringing down 3x, keeping the sign, bringing down negative 12, dividing by 3, x less than negative 4. Again, your key number here is negative 4. Open your circle, going to the left, and that would be your answer. Again, hopefully you're getting a lot of these right. I think you should know a lot of these at this point. Number 12, 6x minus 4 greater than negative 2x plus 12. Again, you got variables on both sides. The thing you've got to do is make sure you move the negative variable, because remember that the negative variable is the small one, and because it's negative you want to use its opposite, which is positive, getting 8x minus 4 greater than 12, because that's gone. And then from there, do what you've been taught to do, which is move the 4 by adding it, and then get rid of your 8 by dividing it. Again, there's only one important number here, that's 2. Open circle, going to the right. And then the very last solving question that you have to worry about is the OR question. If you remember, I told you about OR. I said OR is like an oar on a boat, where you got the person in the middle and they're rowing the boat. So typically what an OR should look like, and this is what you need to learn to do, is that it's going to look something like this. If it doesn't look like that, you need to probably check your work. But again, at least you have an idea of what it should look like, and then you can kind of move your numbers around and do whatever is necessary to check your work. But on this situation, again, with OR, it separates in the middle. You work this problem out by itself. The first thing we would do is, because this 2 is negative, is we would switch it around and get a negative 18. You would then divide by 2, getting b is less than negative 9. That's one answer. But remember, this is one whole problem. So you come over here working this out alone, and what we would do to solve this, because 3 is positive, is we would divide by 3, getting b is greater than negative 1. Now the only problem on this, again, both of these numbers have to go, is that in a number line, negative 9 goes on the left, because again, if you remember, a number line works like this. And notice that negative 9 is over here, negative 1 is over there. Please don't mess that up, because that will screw up everything that you're doing to get this done. But notice that negative 9 is open and to the left. Notice that negative 1 is open and to the right. Notice that that looks like the ORs that I told you should see, and if that does make it to where at least we know that we probably did it right. As long as we didn't mess up on our solving, everything should have been good. The last one on this test, again, was about the speed limit, and again, it's the compound inequality. Keep in mind, the compound inequality is the one where you take and put the lowest number on the left, the biggest number on the right, and put your x in the middle, because the speeds you can go are between 50 and 75. So you want to make sure your 50 goes here, make sure your 75 goes there, put your x in the middle. And again, the key thing to remember is every single compound inequality, if you look back at all the things we did, actually in all the questions that we've done so far, we always had a less than symbol. So 50 is going to be smaller than x is going to be smaller than 75. The key thing is you can go 50 and you can go 75, which is why it should be closed. And again, we'll be learning that, or at least trying to master that by the time you take your test, so you can get it right. Other than that, go ahead and get that paper on. If you've been sleeping, go ahead, now is the time to wake up, because again, this is where you're going to earn your 20 points out of your 50, and then again, you're going to get the rest of them for actually finishing what's going on. What I'm doing right now is I'm going to teach you how to do absolute value equations, which is another lesson. This lesson is not on the test, but it is part of the chapter, and it is important to know. And so I want to make sure we at least go over it, so I can kind of help you understand it before we get going, because you never know when this might pop up. And again, for those, I do know that there's some of you who take pride in your math skill, your math ability, and your intelligence, and I want to make sure that if you see these kinds of questions, that you know how to answer them. So we're going to talk through some things. You're going to copy down what I write, but again, at the end, you should know how to do absolute value equations, which is just a slight shift from what we're used to. So let's go ahead and get started on that now. First off, I think we've seen absolute values. We know that absolute value is the symbol that says I don't care what's on the inside. Just take the sign off of it and give me the number that comes out. So absolute value of -5 is +5, or just 5. We don't even care about the positive, it's just 5. The absolute value of 3, again, does not switch it over. Again, that's the mistake that people make. It doesn't switch it. It just says, just give me the number. I don't care about the sign. So whenever you do absolute value, you are just going to write a regular number as your answer. So the absolute value of 0.4 is still just 0.4. Just like the absolute value of -1.7 is just 1.7. Again, take the signs off. None of these numbers have signs. Out of these 4 questions, they are just regular numbers that come out. That was what we know. That was what we learned. That was what we had to do for that first test that we took. So when you put that together with what we're going to be doing, we are now going to be using a variable. And so if you think about it, if absolute value of x is equal to 4, what values make it true? And I guess you should put the s in there. But the first answer is going to be easy to find. If the absolute value of x is 4, the value that makes it true is that x equals 4. And again, think with me for a moment. If I take a 4 and put it in here, the absolute value of 4 is 4. But that is not the only value, and this is what makes absolute value equations tricky, is because the other number that makes this 4 is -4. Because if you put a -4 in here, remember that the absolute value does what with the sign is that it takes the sign away. So if you put a -4 in here, you're going to get the answer of +4. So when you do an absolute value equation and you want to say solve absolute value of x equals 4, the problem that you're going to have when you get out of this class or you're taking a test is that you've got to remember that there are 2 solutions to that equation. 4 works and -4 works, because both of those lead to the answer of +4. Same thing, just kind of discussing this. If absolute value of x equals 8, what values make it true? Again, the answers are easy to see. You know you're going to have an 8, so your first answer is very simple. X equals 8. But your second answer has to be also true, and that if you want it to be an 8, you can take the negative off, so your second answer would be x equals -8. So again, x equals 8 is your first answer, x equals -8 is your other answer, because again, absolute value of 8 is 8. Also, the absolute value of -8 is 8, and so both of these answers would make it true. One more before we get to the actual solving and put all this together, which I think some of you can kind of see where this is going. If the absolute value of x equals 15, what values make it true? I hope you can kind of see this on your own. The first value that should make it true is x equals 15. The second value that should make it true is x equals -15. Those are your 2 answers. Now, what we just did is we just learned how to set up an absolute value equation. Because what you will do anytime you solve an absolute value equation is you notice that we rewrote it without the bars, and then we rewrote this side without the bars, and we switched the outside number. And so whenever you're asked to solve an absolute value equation, that's what you're going to do. Again, the rewriting. The solving, again, solving itself doesn't change no matter what happens over the rest of this time here. Solving itself is going to stay pretty much the same. The thing you've got to be careful about is the fact that if you don't learn how to adjust to certain situations, and you're just going to miss those silly things that go on. Like this is easy. You first off write it without the bars, so x equals 11, and then you put x equals and then switch the other side, which would be -11. Again, absolute value is going to stay the same. The x is going to stay the same, but you write a +11 and you write a -11. On number 9, again, first thing you do is write about the bars. X equals 20, and then you write x, because again that's what's in there, equals, and then switch to your -20. Alright. Number 10, this is where we start. So again, what we just talked about is that whenever you're doing your absolute value stuff, that whatever's on the inside does not change. Notice again, we had x's on the inside. If you go back to these, all of these had an x on the inside, and you had x and x. You had x and x, x and x. The difference was on the outside number. The outside number was regular and then switched. Regular, then switched. Regular, then switched. And so that carries over into what we're about to do on this part here. So what we do whenever we have an actual equation on the inside is you follow that same pattern. Sorry about that, hit the microphone. So you follow the same pattern, which is write what's on the inside. Leave the outside number alone. Then for your second one, write what's on the inside and switch the outside number. So again, your two answers here are based off of what's on the inside, x plus 2, x plus 2. But again, 5 and negative 5, now you solve that the way you know how to, which is to subtract 2. That gives us x equals 3. When you subtract 2 over here, negative 5 and negative 2, if you don't have a calculator, you shouldn't really be doing that anyway, because I think 5 and 2 are easy enough. 5 steps backwards, 2 steps backwards lead to 7 steps backwards, which is a negative 7. And that's all. If you were asked to do x minus 4 equals 6, first off, again, it's an absolute value. Once you see an absolute value, recognize that there should be or could be two possible answers. But again, the way you do it is you write it without the bars first, so leave your x minus 4 equals 6. But your second answer, again, leave the inside alone, but switch the outside number. So again, x minus 4 equals 6, and then x minus 4 equals negative 6. From there you solve the way you've been taught, which again is to add 4, x equals 10, and then add 4, again working with our stuff from the chapter 1 test. Negative 6 positive 4 makes negative 2. If you were asked to solve absolute value of 5x equals 20, again, same thing. Leave this alone, leave that alone, and then rewrite the inside as is, switch the outside number. Now solve both of those. Divide by 5, where x equals 4. Divide by 5, and x equals negative 4, and those are your answers. Higher level questions, but again, nothing really tough. You just got to make sure you understand what's going on. But again, we understand that the absolute value here can either be 7 or negative 7. So what we do is we write 2x plus 1, equals 7. You write it without the bars. Then you leave the inside alone and set it equal to negative 7. Sorry if you can't see that. And again, what you do is you solve that the way we know how to. So 2x equals 6. Then you divide by 2, and x is 3. On the other side, again, you will subtract 1. Again, without a calculator, negative 7 and negative 1 work together to make negative 8. And then you divide by 2, getting x equals negative 4. (14) 4x plus 2 equals 14. Again, rewrite your inside. 4x plus 2 equals 14. Then you rewrite your 4x plus 2 again, but again, it's not going to equal 14. It's going to equal negative 14. And again, that's where you have to be careful. So again, from there, you will now subtract 2, 4x equals 12. Divide by 4, and x equals 3. The problem that people start having is they want to say that x equals 3 and x equals negative 3, but it doesn't work like that. Like the things that you hope happen don't always happen, and you got to be careful to follow what's going on. Negative 14, negative 2 work together to make negative 16, which you then divide by 4 to get negative 4. (9 minus 2x equals 3. Rewrite write it without the bars. Then copy the bars portion of it and switch the outside number. Now we know, or we should know, that this is a positive 9 that we move by subtracting it again, because even though that's a negative 2x. Don't forget that a negative 2x comes down with negative 6. Don't forget what we just learned to do, even though it's not an inequality, is to switch the x, switch to 6, and then divide. Same thing over here. Move the 9 by subtracting it. Negative 2x, negative 12, because negative 3 and negative 9 work together. Switch your signs. Divide by 2, and x equals 6. Now I do have one more thing I want to talk to you about real fast. At this point you have pretty much earned your 20 points. Your 30 is in answering the question at the very end of the video. And there's one thing I want to look through before I quit, because we do have about 5 minutes to spare. This represents a test that you're going to be taking. So for those of you who failed this test, I just want to kind of go through it very quickly. Again, not long. Give me a few minutes. I'll make this no longer than 30. I think you can see it's 30-minute video, but again, it's going to end pretty quickly. Keep in mind, remember, number of terms. If you've seen it now, you know that terms are the blocks. And so that's one thing you're going to be asked. We know that like terms are these things, and we know that the constant term is here. So again, I'm not so much worried about that. I hope you remember how to do the word. Remember, quotient meant divide. Remember that we wrote our division like a fraction. Also remember that the first number went on top, so this would have been 8 over x. The less than, if you remember, was subtraction. Also remember that less than sent the number to the back. The product of a number and 7, if you remember, was 7x. And then we went there. Also, for those of you who have been working on it, 5 times the sum was the one where you put 5 parentheses of a number, and 4 was sum meant add, so x plus 4. Again, that's not what I'm here for, but I do want to make sure we at least check some of this stuff out. For example, some of the things that people missed. Not worried about number 5, but number 6 we should be better at now. Again, negative 3 we now know is here. 2 we now know is here. 1.25, if you remember, is go over to 1 and then go over a quarter. That's your half. That's a quarter. Negative 1.75, here's your negative 1, here's your negative 1.5. Your 0.75 should have been there. 7, I think we just did on the earlier part of this, where we had to say something about a solution. The difference is, because this is equals, there's only one solution there, and so what you do is you take 3 times 3 plus 1, which is 9 plus 1, or 10, not a. 3 times 4 plus 1, which is 12 plus 1, or 13, which is what we're looking for, and that is it. Again, the difference between the equal sign and the inequality sign was that only one thing worked at a time. I am going to go to this last part here and call it quits, because there are some things that you should know better now that cost a lot of you a lot of points. All of you are going to retake this test, unless you got an A on it the first time, but I think you're still going to retake it just to bring it back to your memory. This is just like terms, if you remember. This is 1, 2, 3 x's, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 as your number, if you remember that at all. Now again, the thing about this test is that you have to take it without a calculator. That's why I want to kind of talk about it now, to make sure we at least get it. If you remember when we were doing this, this was like teachers and students, and I said you feed the first teacher, which was multiplication. Your next teacher in line was 16 divided by 4. And then from there you fed the first student and the second student to get that done. Here, I said that the exponent was like a principal, and that 4 squared meant 4 times 4. So we did 5 times 16 minus 5. After the end, you find out that 5 times 16 is 80 minus 5, which is 75. But again, real quick before I wrap this up, I think we know what this is now. I think we know what this is now. We should know what square root means. Again, that's the number that multiplies and make 36, and I think our number skills are better to make that 6. I think we should be better at this to know that negative 9 and positive 6 don't like each other. and that you get a negative 3. I think we should know now that a negative 12 and a negative 3 make negative 15. I think we've worked on the fact that this turns into a plus a positive, which means we were supposed to rewrite it if you remember solving that, and that this turns into a positive 4 because the positives win by 4. We've also done some multiplication, which gives us negative 8 times 7 would be 56. I think we remember now that two negatives make a positive, which is 15. I even think we remember that 6 times negative 4 would be a negative 24. But again, just in general, I want you to understand that all these questions are questions that some of you failed. Expanding, remember that means 2 5 times. I think we've worked with the fractions more. I think we've definitely done the distributive property a little bit. Actually, I think we had to do this with solving. And then you have a couple more things, but like I said, I just want to let you know again, you are going to be taking the Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 tests over after we take this Chapter 3 test. But other than that, go ahead and answer this question at the very end, and make sure you go ahead and start studying for the test that we took. Again, you'll get that sheet back on Monday. We'll go over it, and then start reviewing for the test. Thank you for your participation, and have a good weekend.